Before we go into your story, I'd love to hear about, what do you think really separates someone who gives up and those that have the grit to keep going? Because your story, which we'll get into, is just incredible in the grit aspect.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I don't know. I guess you just have to really want it. And I think that I was at a point in my life when I really, really wanted to make it work for better or worse. And, sometimes actually it's okay to stop and give up, right? If the idea is not a good one and you're getting feedback that this isn't the right path, sometimes it's not a bad thing to actually listen to
Mm,
other people and to take that into account and pivot or make adjustments as necessary. But ultimately, I was very stubborn and I wanted to get this thing done. And I was getting good indications as well. And so that enabled me to keep going and it, gave me the confidence that there really was something here. And it goes back to what you said initially in terms of just being scrappy. And that's really what this came down to. I literally just started taking the product door to door. And, we'll get into the origin story and all of that. But ultimately that's how we started. And I just kept on going.
yeah. And you mentioned something actually really good because you're right. There's actually nothing wrong with giving up if there aren't those, momentum flags or indication of people loving your product. It's good to pivot. It's good to try something else. It's good to start something else. So I love that you mentioned that because I think sometimes people might just stay in one lane when maybe there could be so much opportunity if they switched or pivoted. And even in my career, I've definitely jumped around a lot and have seen that. But let's go back to, the very early days. I know you grew up in San Francisco, which is like the tech hub, startup hub. But what I find so interesting is that you actually didn't dive into the world of startup life or entrepreneurship. So tell me more about what you thought you wanted for yourself kind of growing up in that environment or within your family.
Well, I think, yeah, I even though I grew up in San Francisco, I mean, I think I was intrigued by being an entrepreneur, and intrigued by the stories that I was seeing around me. And so I think that is when the seed was planted. But then I actually went on this very traditional path once I got to college and, did the analyst program in investment banking like you did. And was thinking that that was going to be my path, a more traditional corporate path. And it wasn't until a few years after business school even that I finally was like, you know what, this actually really isn't for me. I
Hmm.
think that I am an entrepreneur at heart. I want to do my own thing. I want to take that risk. But it took me a long time to get there because I was risk averse for a very long time and I was more cautious. And so it took me a while, and that's okay. Sometimes it takes us a long time to get there, but it's never too late to start your own thing. And so even though I started mine, later than a lot of others, who were doing so in San Francisco, for example, I knew that I wanted to take that leap.
That resonates so much even with my story. I, was in finance and in tech and just dabbled around and I always knew I wanted to start something, but I don't think I was ready yet or I didn't have the idea. Like the timing in the universe just it wasn't ready until early 30s. So it's so interesting because I know you also quote unquote followed the herd, right? You went to an amazing business school, you got a great job. Sometimes the longer you are in a career, the harder it is to leave it because you're like, I've built my reputation, I've built my network. What was that spark where you're like, all right, this is just not for me? I've been thinking about it, but it's actually time to do something.
I mean, it helped that I wasn't loving the corporate job that I was in.
That does help.
And so it was kind of like, look, I can go try to find something else, or maybe this is a good time to just take that entrepreneurial leap. And so I think that's for me what did it. You're right that had I been loving my corporate job, it would have been harder to leave and to make that transition. But I think it helped that I wasn't enjoying it, and that to me also revealed that that wasn't my path and that I wanted to experiment. And so that's when I took the leap. And and like you said, up until that point, I didn't really have an idea per se, right?
Mhm.
So it was more just enamored with the concept of being an entrepreneur, but I didn't have the idea, anything specific. And then it kind of all came together where I was looking to leave. I wanted to do something entrepreneurial. I started thinking and just being more observant about things around me. And I came upon this idea for natural chewing gum because I was starting to get into natural products in all aspects of my life, including cleaning products and beauty products and all that. And so I started buying organic foods and doing the whole thing. But I realized that my gum that I was chewing was still very synthetic. And so I started doing research, and sure enough, regular gum is made of plastic. So you're literally
Yes.
chewing a piece of plastic, which most people don't realize. And that was news to me. And I tried to find a natural gum, and there wasn't one. And so that was really this aha moment for me, because I was like, why is there no natural option here when every other food category does have a more natural option? And so that made me think, okay, this could actually be a business idea here. There is this void in the market where this thing just doesn't even exist. And so that's really what the catalyst was.
Yeah, and I love that you said, because we have a lot of women who listen in on the podcast that they're like, I don't love my job. I don't have an idea. And I definitely was there for years, right? But I love what you said, like, you were just observant, because I think that's when the ideas kind of click. It's like when you genuinely are ready, you just hate your job that much. You're like, I'm not ready to jump to another company. And you're like, I got to figure it out. And you kind of step back and you're just observing everything, whether it's your own problems, which, how your business came, how my business came. And I love that. And it sounds so simple, but I feel like if you can step into that if you're ready and just kind of observe different issues, do research like you did, and so you come across this potential gum idea. You definitely didn't quit your job right then and there. So tell me more about the impetus between you get this idea to kind of, experimenting in your kitchen and whatnot.
Yeah. So I started experimenting in my kitchen, and it took a long time, because I was doing it on the side. It probably took a year of just sort of thinking about it, experimenting with the formula in my kitchen, hand making it, and trying to come up with a packaging and a brand name and all of that. And actually, the first step that I took, which I've forgotten, I sometimes
Yeah.
forget, is I
Yeah.
actually listed it on Kickstarter.
Oh, interesting.
And yeah, and that was a really good beginning step for me, because so I didn't go straight into raising money or anything, but I listed on Kickstarter because I want to see, is this something people will even sign up for? And we had a modest sort of launch on Kickstarter. I don't know, maybe we pre-sold like 20,000 or 30,000
Oh,
worth of product,
wow. Yeah.
but that was still significant. And I was like, wow, okay, 20,000 people, nearly, I don't know if it was like $1 a pack or whatever it was, but
Mhm.
some thousand, number of thousands of people want this product. This is interesting. And then, of course, what that did was it forced me to start actually make the product and deliver it by a certain deadline, because now I was on the hook for it. And so that was also a great forcing function. So I got my act together, I made the product, I shipped it out, hand packed it, hand shipped it, and really got great feedback from Kickstarter. And then I used those funds to reinvest in the business. And I started walking it around to local stores in New York, which was where I was, where the company is based. And the first store that I was able to get it in was the Whole Foods at Columbus Circle. And that was back when individual stores could make those kinds of decisions. And it started flying off the shelf. And that's when I realized, okay, there is really something here. And that's when I went out and raised some money from angel investors.
Got it. Okay, so I have a million questions right here. Just going back to one thing that you said that I loved is you put it on Kickstarter and there was a deadline. There's something about a deadline where you have to get it out, because you can sit and think about the packaging and how you're like, you can spend out days, weeks, months on the littlest things, but when you have a deadline, you got to get it out. So I don't know if you remember that time frame, because you have beautiful branding and you're very smart and intentional. Like, did you ever overthink anything at that time, or did that deadline just kind of push you to be like, I got to get it out?
Well, yeah, absolutely. We overthink things all the time in
I
terms of our
know.
design and packaging. And so it is true. And so at the time, yeah, I had been going back and forth on it on my own for months. And so it really was helpful to have that deadline. And then it was like, okay, we're gonna go with this. And it was good. But I did take that time though. I didn't, of course, list it on Kickstarter until there was a sort of skeleton framework in place. But yeah, it was really helpful. And on the packaging, I'm glad you noticed that, because our look is minimal, but
Yeah.
it's something that's still very accessible. And we wanted it to show the people that this was different, that it's natural, and it's very hard to do minimalism right. And so it did take a really long time to come up with that package and to come up with the name and all of that. So, but I think that the brand DNA that was formed there still is carried through today. And, I'm really proud of where the brand has gone. We've now expanded into new items and all that, which I'll talk about. But our brand DNA has very much stayed the same. And so that simplicity and authenticity, I think, really does come through in that package.
I love the branding. It definitely stands out when you see it. You're like, "Oh, that's a gum, like, very simple, like, Whole Foods, like, clean." It definitely gives you a feeling. So, you don't have a background in food, and how did you even dabble in like, you're creating gum from your kitchen, I wouldn't even know where to start. So what did that process look like, and how long did it take you to nail down the potential product?
It took months, and I just, I was just sort of obsessed with this thing
Mhm.
and trying to get it made. And so I looked at what gum used to be made of, and I looked at the current ingredients, and I kind of just reverse engineered it. And so I took out all the synthetic things, and then I put in natural things. So instead of artificial flavor, I found natural essential oils. Instead of artificial sweeteners, I was like, let me just use organic raw cane sugar. And so it was a lot of swapping. And for the base, instead of plastic, I chose chicle, which is a tree sap. And that's what gum used to be made of back in the 1950s. Before the large companies switched to plastic. So I ordered some chicle, some tree sap, and had no idea what the proportions should be in terms of the recipe because that's, of course, not listed or printed anywhere. And
Yeah.
so just did a lot of trial and error. It was a lot of trial and error, and so it did take, as I said, it took close to a year to even get that recipe, and of course, I wasn't doing it 20 hours a day because I still did have a day job, but it took a really long time, but, finally got it done, and it's just kind of that I don't know how I was so confident in terms of just getting it out there even though I didn't have that food background, but I did, and then it worked.
There's something about when you're really excited and obsessed about the idea, you're like, "I'm gonna do whatever it takes to, like, get it out." Like, even my experience, like, it's funny to even think you forget about those moments, and, like, I couldn't find a co-packer, and I was like, "Alright, I'm just gonna buy a bunch of machinery and put it in my kitchen and mess around for the beta." Like, you just figure it out when you really want something, so there's, like, a force of nature that comes within you
It's
to
true.
make
That's
it
absolutely
happen.
right.
Yeah, and I'm so curious because taste is something that is really tricky, right? It's so subjective. Everybody has their own opinion. So, how did you dial in the taste for your first product?
Yeah, I mean, well, another really, I think, interesting thing that I did was that so I had the Kickstarter and got feedback from that Kickstarter. So I
Okay.
used that feedback to help iterate upon the recipe. But of course, I had friends and family trialing it and tasting
Mhm.
it, and giving feedback. And but that first formulation was very much to my palate, and I think that over time I've since adjusted it to take into account kind of the broader, more mass appeal. So over the years, we've made little adjustments. We've made it a little bit sweeter. We've made it a bit less
Mhm.
soft. I really liked a less sweet, kind of very soft gum at the beginning, but we did take into account what the people wanted. And one thing that I did too early on was that I listed it on Amazon Marketplace. People forget Amazon's a marketplace. You can list anything that you want on Amazon. And so I listed it on Amazon and right away started getting really great feedback on Amazon too from the reviews and very helpful feedback as well. And I was able to then take that feedback to iterate on the product.
Amazing. Yeah, you forget about Amazon and you were pretty early. Like it was almost a decade ago, right? That you launched the business? Oh my goodness.
That's
What
right.
a
So Amazon has actually been a really great partner for us and have continued to grow on Amazon year over year. It's such a large platform that you really get access to so many people off the bat. So that was
mm,
really great for our exposure. And it's something that I would recommend to any entrepreneur with a physical product, a CPG product. If they want to get a lot of feedback right away from Amazon, not to mention sales, because you actually, I mean, it was a real revenue driver and that those funds helped fund the rest of the business, really.
it's interesting that you bring up Amazon. We're not on, my company's not on Amazon, but I've had a few people in the past 6 months mention it. So I'm like, "All right, it's a sign to explore it." And I'm always curious because it is a marketplace. So how did you create awareness, right? Were you running ads? Like what really helped you? Because once you post it, it doesn't necessarily mean like people are going to automatically come. So how did you kind of drive demand early on?
So early on, yeah, we did do ads. And with the ads, our return was very high because on Amazon, people are looking to shop. So it's a very intentional search. If someone's searching for gum,
Sure.
they want to buy gum. So the return on those ads was actually quite high. So we did spend a little bit on ads at the beginning, and then over the years, we spent more and more. At the beginning, there weren't that many other tools, but over the years, again, now they have so many different tools. There's Amazon stores, and there's videos that you can do, and there are a lot of free tools as well, a lot of levers now. So I think that for anyone who's aspiring to get their product into the marketplace, it was an invaluable tool for us.
Amazing. I love that it was so early in your journey too. So you go to Whole Foods. It's so interesting. I actually just had the founder of Sweet Lauren on my podcast. She actually started her business probably around the same time as you, and she got into that Whole Foods Columbus Circle, and she has like a cookie dough.
Oh,
And she
yeah.
mentioned she met a buyer, and it's very serendipitous. So tell me more. That is big to get into Whole Foods, but you just kind of walked in there. Like, how did you even start the relationship, and any learnings from that experience?
Well, actually, one learning is to talk to as many people as you can, because it actually didn't occur to me at the beginning that I could just even walk into a Whole Foods and sell it, right? You would never even think of that. And so
Mhm.
I was thinking about small stores, little mom and pop stores. But I had lunch with a friend, and he's not in the food industry, but we were just brainstorming. He was like, Caron, and he pushed me. I still remember him, Rohit. He said, go, just take your product into Whole Foods, just go in and sell it in. Who knows? And I was like, you know what? I never thought of that, but yeah, why not? Why not just walk in
Yeah.
and try? And so
Mhm.
he actually gave me the idea. And so then I started walking into the Whole Food stores, and sometimes it's very hard to find the buyer on the floor. I walked into a bunch of them and didn't really make any traction, but the Columbus Circle one happened to get in touch with the manager, who then said, okay, well, meet this buyer over here, and found the right guy who was an assistant buyer in candy, and he's the one who I worked with to get it in. So, and even that process took probably 8 or 10 months from when I first met him to then doing all the paperwork and actually getting it in. But it was, I think the lesson there is patience, because it did take a long time, but also to just talk to people and network and get your idea out there, because people have really good suggestions. And again, my friend wasn't even in the food business, but in talking about it with him, he's the one who actually planted that seed in my head.
I love that. And I feel like I'm a broken record player on this podcast because I'm very passionate about like share your idea with people because I learn and get things done by hearing your experience, talking to different people. Like my brain operates like that. And I think some people hold their ideas too close, but if you put it out there, like so many people have different ideas that you, like you said, you didn't even think like the most simple things. Sometimes you don't even think about just walking into a Whole Foods until someone tells you, you're like, oh yeah, duh. Like
Exactly,
that sounds great. Or
exactly.
even like Amazon. I'm like, good point. I don't know why we're not on it, like simple things. So I love that you also had that experience. So, and I think even at the time, you were still creating all of this from your kitchen, right? When you were even fulfilling Whole
Yeah,
Foods?
yeah, in those early days, yes. And then but once we started getting into the Whole Foods, then realized I needed to go to a commercial kitchen. And so at that point, rented space at a commercial kitchen in Long Island City, and that was kind of our first little factory. So we were in a food incubator, and we were in there for a few years. And then as we grew, got a bigger space within there, a bigger and bigger space, then finally outgrew that and found our current factory in Brooklyn, which is where we make all of our own gum.
Yeah, and I'm so curious because we're pretty hands-on right now with our manufacturing process, and I'm also curious because I know you still handle the manufacturing yourself, and that's like another business in itself. I'm like, wow, it must be so easy to like have a co-packer that manages everything. Like, what a
Exactly.
different world, right?
It's a
But
different
you
world
also have
now.
been very hands-on. So I'm curious in those early days when it was just you, I know you didn't have a lot of help. You're managing the sales, you're running the operations. Who was managing the production aspect? Was it still you as like the lead or did you hire someone early on there?
So once we went to the commercial kitchen, I knew that I was going to be too busy to actually make the
Yeah,
gum
smart.
and go out and do sales and everything else. So at that point, and again, this was at a point where we were getting orders, right? So like those first few thousand packs of gum I made in my own kitchen. But once we were in multiple Whole Food stores and little mom and pops in New York, and we're starting to get orders, it was like, okay, now we've really got some demand here. And so hired a guy who was just a young guy. getting straight out of college. Again, I had raised at that point, I'd raised money from angels, but it wasn't much. And so I was still very much in that bootstrap kind of mentality. And to just hire this young guy who had worked in a few restaurants. And so I figured, okay, well, he's worked in some restaurants. I'll give him the formula. He can make the gum. And that's what he did. So he's the one who, stood in that factory all day long and made some gum. And that was the beginning. Those were the early days.
Yeah, and I don't know, it's probably funny
And
to
it was
look
all by
back on.
hand. We didn't
What
have
is it?
any machines at that point. It was all by hand.
Oh
There were
my
no machines
gosh.
at that point. So
Wow. Well, it's great that you found someone and you found a way to do it. And it's cool to hear because I mean, depending on your product, right? You can't just always make something from a commercial kitchen. It just depends on what you're creating, but it's a good option because I didn't even know what a commercial kitchen was. It was actually my friend who has a cookie business that I was talking about my product who was like, "Why don't you look into commercial kitchens?" Because I could not find a co-packer like early on. And I was like, what is that? So it's cool to talk about because it's a good option if you're creating some kind of a food product in those early days. You know, obviously you can't super scale there, but it's still a good like stepping stone for people. And it's been super helpful for us. So I love to hear that. And, you know, you mentioned you raised a small round from angels. How was that experience for you? Kind of raising money, asking for money? Was it different, unique? Did you get rejections? Like, how was that time frame?
yeah, I got of course got rejections. Yeah, of course got a lot of rejections. But the rejections were all very nice. I mean, it was always like,
Mhm.
okay, I think that everyone liked the idea. It was more like, okay, well, this is a bit early for us, once you're in more stores, come back, and that type of thing. And then so I kind of had a bunch of conversations, and then once I got one person to commit, then the rest just really followed, right? Because then he told his friends, and then it was like, okay, well, we have these people in, so then okay, then I want to be in, and like everyone says, once you get that first kind of anchor, then everyone else just easily latches on. So, but it took definitely a few months to do that process. It wasn't super difficult, but had my share of rejections too. Yeah.
I mean, and probably it wasn't as difficult because you kind of proved the concept, right?
Yeah, I had a real thing that people could taste and see at that point. It wasn't just abstract. And so I think that was definitely helpful.
I love that. And going back to kind of you owning your own factory, you know, even now for the gum at least, like that's not something you hear quite a lot. So tell me more about the intention around still maintaining your own factory for the gum.
For the gum, initially, it was because we had no choice. There was no one who was making natural gum. And now there is. Now 10 years later, there are co-manufacturers out there who do make natural gum. But we like having control over our own process. It gives us a lot of flexibility. It gives us a lot of options, and there is a cost benefit as well, right? Because you're not paying a middleman, so it is cheaper for us to do it ourselves. The margins are better. That being said, it comes with its own host of headaches, right? Of course, being a manufacturer. We are now, though, for our new products using co-manufacturers. And so we now have a hybrid where we do the gum ourselves and we do co-manufacturers for our new products. And let me tell you, the co-manufacturer world, even though you're not doing it yourself, there are a lot of challenges there too. So, I think I was surprised at actually how many headaches come with co-manufacturers because that's not something I was really aware of. I thought it would be much simpler. Uh, and in some ways it is. I mean, you're not having to run your own factory, but you're also at the whim of someone else. And I think that lack of control has been hard.
Yes. Ugh. I mean, and what would be maybe some of the challenges that you face? Because it's interesting. You would think it would be a little bit easier to outsource it, have someone do it, but I could imagine there would be some things. But are there a few that you can kind of share with?
Yeah, it's about, I mean, of course, the co-manufacturer has other clients as well. And so if you need something, suddenly, you got an order from Whole Foods or Target and you need 10,000 units of X done, in 3 weeks, they're like, oh, well, we have a full production calendar. We can slot you in 4 months from now. And you're like, wait a minute. No, no, no. I need this in a month. And so fighting for production time, when they have calendars from other clients that have been, set in place for months, that's a very difficult thing. So I think lead times are difficult. Doing things on the fly, that's really difficult. And at our stage, we still get sudden increases in demand. There are a lot of fluctuations because we might get a new account that we didn't anticipate. And then suddenly we need that product, right? So I think that's really hard to manage. And then also the product quality, because we, of course, really care about our quality. And there are situations where, something's not produced up to par where we have to then get rid of that product. And so those are all difficult conversations to have. But yeah, it's just part of the co-manufacturing thing. Yeah, so we're learning a lot now as we go through that process.
It's so interesting. I was listening to, I can't remember which podcast, but they were saying how, I guess, this person's mentor, who is pretty big in business, I don't know who it was, they didn't mention it, was saying that one of the biggest advice he gave him was, in business, there's always problems. That's just part of it. And I feel like it's so basic, but true. Like, if you know you're starting something, I mean, even at your level, you're dealing with stuff. I can't imagine you get an order and you're not slotted in to get it, but as the founder, like, you need to make sure that they get it done. And so I'm curious, because so much of this role, even from the early days, is just getting something across a finish line. And I think that's a skill set that anyone can foster, even if you don't have your business yet, but it's so key. So when you're in those moments where there isn't like a straight answer, right? Like, you're just in this situation where, I don't know, maybe we can talk about, like, you get a PO, it's a big order, you don't want to say no, and you have to kind of manage that relationship with your co-packer. How are you getting that done? Or, like, what mindset do you have? And maybe it could be another challenge, but anything there?
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly what you said. The mindset is we need to get this
Yeah.
done no matter what. So we are going to get it done. We are not saying no to Target. We're not saying no to Walmart. We're not saying no to Whole Foods. So we have to find a way to get it done. And maybe we need to find a backup co-man. Maybe we need to figure out a commercial kitchen to do it ourselves if need be. But we are going to make this product for this PO, and we're going to fill this PO. So that's been my philosophy.
Yeah, totally. It's like, you got to make it work, whatever it is. We
We gotta
had our
make it work.
first,
We gotta make it work, yeah.
oh my
Yeah.
God, especially for Whole Foods and being in those big retailers. But before, you're now in so many retailers nationwide. Maybe looking back at those earlier experiences when you were trying to get into Target, I know it didn't happen quick and overnight, but any lessons as you kind of reflect back in those early days when you were trying to get into some of these larger retailers?
You have to just be persistent. It took us many years to get into Target.
Mhm.
I had and the buyers always roll over. So you might get somewhere with one buyer, then they move to a different desk, and then you're starting from scratch again. So, I mean, it took, I don't know, I mean, from when I first made contact to Target to when we finally got in, 5 or 6 years maybe. So a
Mhm.
lot of these things just take a lot of time. So you have to just be patient and be persistent, even though that's hard. It's
Yeah.
hard to be patient. It's easy to be persistent, but it's hard to be patient as an entrepreneur.
Mhm.
But what I realized is that with a lot of this stuff, you just have to be patient. And so, but while you're waiting, you still try to prove yourself in other channels. So it was like,
Mhm.
okay, well, we can't get into Target right away, but let's sell as much gum as possible in all the stores that we are in so that our data looks great, so that when we go back to the Target buyer each year, we can show them our progress and how much we've grown and how well our gum is selling. And then ultimately those data points are what help you get in. So you just have to keep trying each year. And with food, it's very long sales cycles because they only look at the category once a year. So if they say no this year, then you got to wait until next year to try again. So
Mhm.
it does take a long time.
I love that. I think I mean, I'm only 3 years in my journey, but I've obviously interviewed so many incredible women like you who are way ahead of me. And I feel like so much of business, this might be a very big blatant statement, is just like being patient and persistent. Like, you just got to keep going. You got to not give up. You just keep going.
Yeah.
Do you agree
Yeah.
with that?
Yeah. And that's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah. So it
Everything
reminded
takes
me.
longer than you think it will from
That's true.
we now have, a new line of chocolates, and I thought that it would take a year to make these chocolates. It took years to make the chocolates, and to get them launched. So everything just takes longer than you think it will, and now we're getting them into stores, and that process is taking a long time. Just everything takes a lot of time when you're dealing with a physical product. That's something that you have to just remind yourself about, because it's not a tech company that some kind of software, that's a different thing entirely. We're dealing with real products. real physical products that take time to actually physically manufacture and make, and it's just a completely different world.
Totally. And I'm curious, I don't think I had asked you, so I'm circling back a little bit, but what point did you officially leave your job and you were doing this full time?
Once I raised the money.
Okay, got it,
Yeah,
got it.
once I raised that angel money, once we had gotten into those initial stores and I raised the money, and then it was like, "Okay, now I can quit." And I paid myself a small salary, definitely, of course, took a pay cut,
Yeah,
paid myself a small salary from that initial fundraise, but it was what at that point, I was confident that I could get this to be something. So, yeah, but that's what it took for me. That's what I needed to feel secure enough to quit my job.
exactly. And I love it. And I love that because you were doing it on the side, you were proving out the concept, you did like the preliminary product, you got it into Whole Foods, and then you took the leap. Because a lot of people think, starting a business, like you have to love risk. And you started the podcast saying, like, I'm actually pretty risk adverse. And I think I am too. Like, I think about A, B, C, D, E, F. I'm like, if this doesn't work, we'll do this. And so I just love to share that because some people might not think that they're naturally entrepreneurial, but it can look just in so many different ways. And I love how you kind of walk through your thought process around taking that leap. And I'm curious, you were someone that was clearly like moving up the ranks, I'm sure financially doing pretty well at the time. Was that pay cut a big shift for you? Or what was your mindset around that?
Yeah, I mean, it was, but I think that I was mentally prepared for it, and I was okay with that
Yeah.
because I wanted to go and try this on my own, and there were things also about there were trade-offs I felt that non-monetary trade-offs that I felt would be worthwhile. So being able to be my own boss and having the flexibility around working hours and all that sort of freedom that comes with being an entrepreneur, I felt like, okay, I don't mind taking this pay cut because I'm going to be getting all these other things that I've always wanted. And so to me, it was worth it to do
I
that.
love it. No, it is so true. You're just like, to manage my own time. It's funny because being in the world of finance too, and then working at startups, I was working all the time. And I'm like, okay, what would it look like if I put this time and did something I was actually passionate about, right? And it feels very different. Like, yes, I also took a pay cut, but there's something very amazing about doing something that you love. Like, you're just like, forget the money. I don't even care what people say. I don't care about the status. Like, you're just all about it. So I love that. And I wish that for everyone is like find something that truly excites you and that you're passionate about because it could help so much in that like transitionary process, which I think is one of the hardest to officially take the leap. I was listening to you in another podcast and you actually mentioned something so interesting that also was kind of a highlight for me that I know was an aha moment for you too. I think you mentioned that when you were just starting out the business, you were talking to a friend who had a significantly larger company, I think like over 100 million, and you're asking him like if he still stays up at night or has worries. Tell me more about that story because it also was an aha moment for me just talking to women here and also some friends who are, far ahead than me.
Yeah, he said he absolutely did stay up at night worrying, and it's funny because you think, oh well, if I only get to 10 million, or if only I get to 50 million, and then at a certain point,
Yeah.
everything's gonna
I'll
be
have a
okay, and
team.
I will have made it, right? But I realized, wow, he's at 100 over 100 million sales, and he's worried every
Mhm.
night. Something could go wrong. This account that's worth 30 million might discontinue him, and then what? It's just more problems. Yeah, bigger problems. So that was really, eye-opening as well. So it really doesn't end ever.
Yeah, I know. I was just going to ask you, as someone who clearly is 10 years down, like how has the problems really shifted for you from those early days to now, obviously being a little bit more established?
Yeah, that's right. It's a good question. I mean, I think now it's less about are we going to run out of money tomorrow and
Mhm.
go out of business, which, at the beginning, that's what you're worried about. Are we even going to make it? Can we even get to the kind of a sustainable level? Now that we're there, it's different, but it's about growth, and you want to keep going, and you want new products, and you want to get those new products out, and so it's. I mean, in some ways, it's different, but it's still a lot of the same problems now that I think about it, right? It's about, I mean, in our case, it's about trying to really get our products out there, more sales, more marketing, more awareness, making sure that all of our new products have the same amazing packaging and the same,
Mhm.
product excellence. It really is the same in many ways. And now we have a larger organization so that you have to layer on people on top of that, so now we actually have people to manage, and so making sure the systems are there and the processes and the organizational structure and all of that, that starts coming into play. So there are more things to think about now. And so I would say, it's not the kind of stress of, oh, is the company going to go out of business tomorrow? But it's still, okay, well, how can we grow? How can we get to the next phase? How can we get to the next stage? Still plenty of stress.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, and adding the people layer is like a whole other ballgame. It's
A
different when
whole
it's
other
like
thing.
you and 2 people. I mean, I mean, we're so small. There's like 5, 6 people, some part-time, so it's still not, big. And I'm like, "Oh, I'm already seeing like the importance of managing people and how it's more time." So I can't even imagine you get to 10, 15, 20. It's a lot of I knew the importance of it, but I didn't understand how much like mental space it takes from like the CEO to just kind of make sure like everyone is working in tandem. It's like you're like an orchestra, you're like the conductor. So I can imagine. And I'm curious because obviously, at whatever stage you are in a business, it is all encompassing. So how do you kind of create those breaks in your life? I don't like the word balance because it could look so different for everyone, but how do you kind of create that space in your mind away from the business to kind of maintain your own mental health?
I have 2 toddlers now, who are 3 and 1.5,
Oh,
and
amazing.
that's also been, sort of a forcing function in a way because I have no choice. They demand so much in terms of my time and attention that I have no choice but to take breaks in the evening and help with dinner and bedtime, and on the weekend, taking them to the park or the museum. And so right now, it's very much, when I'm not working, it's spending time with them. But they help give me that balance because when I'm with them, it's all consuming and I'm not actually able to even think of anything else that's going on.
Yeah.
So it is kind of an interesting balance in that sense.
I love that. It's funny, we don't have any kids yet, but when you don't have kids, you just have all the time in the world, right? Like some people look at me and they're like, "You work at night?" I mean, listen, I'm not hardcore working at night, but I enjoy it and I'm thinking about it. I'm sending an email, I come up with an idea to check. Like you just have all this time to fill up with the business and the list is never ending. So there's always something on your mind. But when you have kids, it's like you actually cannot fit like you can't work. Like you have to be focused on them. So I could imagine that being a really good shift, and a nice break, even though I'm sure it's still tough. And, you have to be there for them as well, which, running a business and being a mother, I'm sure it's a whole nother ball game, but it is a nice break and like a different part of your brain that you're operating.
Exactly, exactly.
So amazing. And I guess I'm curious, I did not know you had 2 toddlers. That's amazing. So I'm sure you're super busy, but has that shifted anything for you in terms of like how you run the business, how you think about the business since you've had kids?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, I mean, just in terms of the day to day, I think that, when we going back to one of the reasons why I wanted to be an entrepreneur and being able to have my own schedule and flexibility, that's really now become, something that I utilize daily. So, I do, so my husband does drop off and I do pick up. And so, everyone knows that between 3 and 4, I'm not available because I'm doing pickup from school. But I, therefore work when I come home and so forth and after the kids go to bed. And so just having that flexibility, I think has really helped me manage that work-life balance with having the 2 toddlers. So I'm very grateful, to be in that position where I can have that sort of flexibility.
Sure. I know it's the biggest gift. I think about like the days in banking, right? And I remember women would like pump. I never knew even what that was, like in the room and between meetings. And I look back, I'm like, oh my God, that is so stressful for your body and the amount of travel that's there. So it is a big gift. And hopefully, I know people still are going into the office, but post COVID, hopefully things are more remote. There's more flexibility, hopefully, for women. But yeah, I always think about those corporate days and I'm like, "My gosh, it is not easy being a
Yeah, not
woman
easy.
there." I love asking this question and we've kind of talked about a few different themes around it already, but what do you think is a messy truth that no one really talks about when it comes to starting a business?
I mean, there's just so many messy truths, I think. Well, I mean, I think people now may be aware of it, but there is there's a glamorous aspect, but there's a lot of non-glamorous
Yeah.
aspects to it, right? I mean, it's like I said, those late nights and the stress and I think one thing that, in my case with being bootstrapped is that we wear multiple hats. And so, look, even now, 10 years later, as CEO, there are times when, if need be, I am packing samples in our warehouse, right? And that's stuff that people don't talk about. There are times when our whole teams had to pitch in and pack up boxes and help make the gum or, whatever it may be. And so I think wearing those multiple hats and doing even those small menial tasks, there is a lot of that I still have to do, even as CEO now.
No, that's good to hear because obviously I'm very much involved in all that and you think when you get bigger, but just to confirm, so you just raised an angel round. You guys haven't done any other raises after that?
No, yeah, we did that angel. We did it. Well, we sort of did it in two tranches. We did a little
Okay.
angel round, and then we did a follow on a year later, and that was it. And so that was,
Amazing.
8 years ago, or whatever. And we haven't had to raise more because we are profitable, which I know is unusual
I know.
for small companies. But yeah, so we haven't had to raise more. But that's where we are.
Yeah, but it just shows like you being lean, scrappy, and I feel like as the founder, like the buck stops at you. Like not only do you need to figure out how to get it done, but like you are there making sure it is actually done. So like jumping in the factory, like yesterday I was at my factory. We have a team, but I'm still kind of there managing it, and I was taking all these calls, because I'm still having meetings, and you see behind me just like manufacturing stuff and everyone's
Yeah,
like, "Oh wow, that's like startup life." I'm like, welcome to CEO world. It is not sexy at all,
exactly.
like I'm managing both, but it was just funny because the background was not like glamorous by any means. And everyone's like, oh, happy President's Day, you're there. I'm like, yes. But amazing. And so I'm so excited to hear more about your new products. I actually did not know that you guys have introduced them. So I'd love to hear more about everything that you guys are up to.
So we started with the gum. We quickly went into mints, and so gum and mints have been with us for a while. But just this past year, we've now launched two new categories. One is a chocolate date bar. So it's a candy bar reinvented. Instead of the artificial ingredients and fillers, we use dates. Very simple ingredient list. Everything we do is now about simplicity. So our positioning is, we're the unusually simple brand, making unusually simple products. And so the ingredients are just chocolate and dates and peanuts. And so it's a delicious, better for you bar that we hope people will really like. And that's now sold at smaller stores across the country, but we will be getting into some big retailers hopefully later this year. And then the second category are fruit gummies. So we all know gummies. That's been a hot trend over the past few years, but our gummies are made with real fruit puree. So instead of gelatin and the artificial fruit flavors, we're actually using real fruit. Those fruit bites, and by the way, both of these can be sold can be found on our website and on Amazon. But in terms of retailers, the fruit bites you can find at select Walmart stores right now and at some regional chains across the country.
So I can understand going from gums and then introducing mints. And how did you think about let's completely pivot and create the gummies and the bar? It's two different product lines. So how did that kind of come about?
So it came about because I've always felt like our brand can extend, right? Because it's it's called Simply and it's so beautiful and it stands for something that really resonates with people. And so it was during COVID actually that I thought, why are we just doing gum when we can actually be all across the candy aisle doing all kinds of things? At the time, gum was doing really poorly because everyone was
Oh,
at
interesting.
home and not and they didn't need gum because everyone was social distancing and staying at home. And so the gum as a category really went down during COVID. And that's when we accelerated our efforts to do R&D into these new products because we were like, hey, we can actually be in any category we want in confections. Why are we limiting ourselves? So that's how it started. And so they've just launched, and we're now excited to do even more launches. We're working on very fun new products as well. And so, yeah, so our goal now is to be your candy brand that you turn to in all types of candy.
I love it. Well, I'm so excited and how cool that the idea for you guys to expand came in COVID. Like, there's always an opportunity if things aren't going well. It just requires you to think differently. So that is entrepreneurship 101 and a great leader. So very cool that you have pivoted. And I'm just so excited for you guys. I love the branding. I love the, simplicity and the clean aspect of your products, and can't wait to see how else you guys grow. But Caron, thank you so, so much for being here today and sharing your story. That was so much fun.
Thank you so much for having me.